Greetings and welcome to this presentation, Level Up Your Document Automation with Advanced SmartFlows Features. I'm your presenter, Chris Tully, an Implementation Team Lead for Document Automation at Experlogix. In this session, we will review how to take your document automation to the next level by discussing and demonstrating some impactful ways of improving your document output workflows. We'll review some features and techniques in SmartFlows, some of them beyond the basics and perhaps lesser known, that can elevate the results of your document automation workflows. Now, it's no secret that your organization will interact almost constantly with your customers, internal and external, or potential customers. There's a quote from a somewhat successful businessman, Bill Gates, that says, "The need to communicate effectively with your customers will come up again and again." This emphasizes that you will have no shortage of opportunity to make an impression on your customers in the way that you communicate with them. Taking advantage of these frequent opportunities can be of great benefit to your organization. There are many reasons why you may want to carefully consider the type of communication that you're having with your customers. We can see here some of the benefits you could expect to achieve by enhancing your document automation processes. With the inundation of media we now experience, presenting your brand clearly and consistently can ensure your messaging is disseminated as you prefer. Information that is clear and accurate is important so that your customers' interaction with your organization remains positive. And of course, as a business, you can also extend your communications with your customers to include trans-promotional material or upsell content that can help drive further marketing and sales prospects. Overall, you can view your communications as a means to creating a positive customer experience and an opportunity to enhance the mutually beneficial relationship you have with your customers. If you are familiar with our document automation solution, SmartFlows, you may recognize that it implements several building blocks to create a full-featured document-centric workflow. In a simplified view, a SmartFlow is the culmination of content that originates from sources like Microsoft Word, images, or PDF files, structured data that can come from a connected system like Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce, or a more generic source like that data that's defined by an XML schema. We have template mappings that define how data and business logic are implemented to control the output of documents. And we have functional flow steps that define the workflow associated with the production of output, such as the data retrieval, the generation of output, and the distribution of it. It's by looking in these areas we can discover techniques and features to leverage to improve our solution and elevate document automation results. So we'll show some specific examples of using Microsoft Word features, composition templates to assemble content, data filtering techniques to present clearer information, and enhancements of the flow steps. All of this used in combination, we might look to take a document that's sort of basic and boring, and maybe evokes a response of simply being okay to one that gets more of an "oh wow" reaction. For this demonstration, we'll review an example of a quote document. Starting with something that's quite basic and bland, we'll take it through several stages of evolution using SmartFlows features and techniques to illustrate how we can end up with a much more appealing final product. This will include beautifying and branding the output, presenting the information in a prettier way, filtering out information we may consider to be unnecessary fluff, adding graphics for a more visual experience, and adding flow functionality for a more robust end result. All right, so let's move on to the demonstration portion of this presentation. And I'm going to try and put into practice some of those topics and ideas that I spoke about during the upfront slides. Now I'm going to ask you to use your imagination a little bit. So as a starting point for the execution of the document automation functionality that SmartFlows offers, I'm going to use Dynamics 365 CE as just as really as the landing page for our scenario. And specifically, I'm going to use a quote. So I'm going to be generating quotes from quote entities or from the quote entity in CE. And for the purposes of this exercise, I have modeled some products that we're going to use on these quotes. And in this case, we're selling widgets. So maybe Experlogix, as it looks to expand its revenue streams, is looking at selling widgets. I actually don't even know what widgets are, but maybe that's good motivation for us to make sure that our document output material is looking good so that our customers know what they're purchasing. So you may notice here I'm in the quote area of CE, and I've pre-created a quote, and in this quote record there's a few things on here, but most importantly there's a list of line items. So these are really the products that we're selling and some pricing information as well. There's some basic account information with the customer. My Lila is set up on here, and various other bits of data that we might come across along the way as we're generating this document. Now, I'm going to kind of take you through an evolution of a document or of a quote document from something that's very bland to something that's hopefully a little bit more interesting, a little bit more representative of the type of output we want to produce, and a little bit more sophisticated of a presentation. And so you might notice that SmartFlows has already been configured. So I have my SmartFlows button on my embedded within my Office Dynamics application here, and I can choose among the quotes that are, or among the documents that are relevant in the context that I'm at in the system. Now in this case, we're going to start with this level 1 quote. So this level 1 quote represents something that's really just our starting point, very basic. This particular flow, all it does is generates a document and produces a PDF for us. And if you look at this document, it's again, very basic, just a cover page, a little welcome letter, and then the actual quotation summary with some pricing and quantity and total information on there. If we look at the flow that's behind this, so if I were to navigate to my level 1 quote, this flow is really, again, very basic. It's just generating this level 1 quote document and then giving us back a PDF. So in the interest of building upon this, let's go to our level 2 quote. And this level 2 quote just kind of ratchets up what was in level 1 a little bit. So we're still going to use the basic framework that level 1 had, but we're going to wrap it in some additional branding and material that we might find relevant to send out with our quote and to give a little bit better impression to our recipients of this. So you'll notice here, really in the background is the same. So if I were to look at this original quote, it's much the same in terms of the basic content, but I've dressed it up with some branding, with some colors that represent my company, with some frame around the page to maybe just set it off a little bit. And it's very consistent throughout, so you'll see that the same framing appears after the first page, and the coloring on that is consistent throughout. Now also take note here that we have added some material that wasn't on this original quote. So this one's only 3 pages, and then the one I've generated now has some extra content at the end. So how did we go about taking this up from a notch from the basic quote to what we're calling this level 2 quote? Well, the important bits of this, of how this was done, are really in my composition. So a composition template, if you're not familiar with it, is kind of a container template. So it holds references to other templates that will ultimately get put together or assembled in a specific way based on the definition of my composition. And it works on the notion of having these different zones of content that I can add to my composition. So we have a body zone, a header and footer zone, and then an insert zone. The body zone is going to contain sort of the main content of your document, so really the guts of what your output is. And it's going to be subject to the header and footer zone. So what does that mean? It means whatever is in my header and footer zone will get appended or added to the aggregate content from my body zone. So whatever my body zone produces, the header and footer zones will be applied, and it could be based on rules, but will be applied consistently across everything that generated out of that body zone. And so the interesting thing that we've done here is we've applied a first page header and a second page header, or every other page header, I should say, to this composition so that it will apply across everything that gets generated in the body zone. And similarly, we've applied a footer zone, only one in this case because we're really only interested in applying one single variation of the footer across the composition document. So let's take a quick look at what these templates look like. And the slick thing here is that when I apply a header or a footer template to my composition, it will take whatever content this template has in its header and footer and apply it to the body. So I can actually use some word features, and this is where it gets a little, I think, very interesting in terms of being able to apply some functionality. I can anchor imagery within my header and footer. So you'll notice that this particular image of my little branded logo here, or whatever this represents, is anchored in the header of the document. So even though the graphic itself kind of applies as more of a watermark, it's anchored in the header so that when the header zone includes it, it will apply behind the body of the document because it's still anchored in the header. Okay, so that's a quick way, a nice way for me to implement some consistent imagery behind, or as a watermark, more or less across everything that I generate in my body zone. If I look at the other headers, you can see that it is actually just those little the little frame of dots around my document. And that way, by having a second instance of a header zone template, so if I look at this composition again, each of these header zones has a slightly different setting. So the first one, my first page one, has a parameter that tells it that it only gets applied to the first page, whereas my non-first page version gets applied to every page. In this case, because I have a first page one, that would be with the exception of the first page. And similarly, the footer zone, the template is applied to every page. And if I take a quick look at what it looks like, so I have my footer, and it won't be a surprise if I look at my final document that the only thing this really has in it is the little Experlogix branding logo that represents what you can see in my generated document here after the first page as the logo in the footer. Now, the second thing I mentioned is this composition is also controlling the output of some additional content, so that promotional material. So if we look at this composition one more time, you'll notice we have these insert zone templates. And the insert zone behaves a little bit different from the body in that these insert zone templates will get included as is after everything in the body zone is included. So they are not subject to the header and footer. So if I look at the results of the inserts in this, you can see there's no header and footer. They're just kind of included as is. They're not subject to the same application of the header and footer. So they're nice for adding sort of static material at the end that you just want to include as sort of an addendum to whatever the guts of your document may be. And the nice thing here is that you can actually apply inclusion conditions to these as you can with any template. But in this case, notice I've added a rule. So this rule says that I only want to include the promotional material if the effective date of my quote is between the 1st of the year and the 15th of June. And if I look at the one I did generate here, the effective date is the 1st of June, so it does fall within that range. But if I were to change this, let's say to the end of June, and save this again, I can regenerate this quote, and the results should be a little bit different because I no longer satisfy the condition for that insert, and it should no longer contain the trans promotional material. And you can see that it's no longer there. I only get this this data sheet at the end. So it's a nice way to apply conditions to your composition content. It's a nice way to have, maybe it's time sensitive material. It could even be branding sensitive. So let's say you had more than one organization that you were selling products for. So you could have different branding that would apply, even like we use the header and footer. So you could have the same idea where maybe I look at a condition on my header and footer to apply different branding imagery under the circumstances where I have different organizations that I may be representing. So I really like this idea of using a composition to apply consistent imagery or branding or look and feel to your document, as well to use the insert zones to really augment the package of information that you might be sending to your customers. Okay, so let's move on to a different concept. I'm going to do something with this composition so that we'll get a different result by making a fairly simple change. I'm going to replace the level 1 quote body with a different one that I'm calling the level 3 body, and save that. And then we'll regenerate this, knowing now that we've replaced the principal part of the quote body with a new version of the body template. And so we should see here that we're going to get some significantly different results in the output of this quote. And so we've made some changes to the coloring here to make it look a little more consistent with the branding we have. But what I really want to focus on is this table. So if we look at what we had before in the pricing table, you can see it's kind of just a list of things, not necessarily the easiest to read. We've made a few changes here where we've done a couple things where we've introduced the discounting into the table. We've added some category columns, but maybe most significantly is we've separated the display of the line items based on the categorization of the different products. So you might have recognized in my product definition that the various line items, products on the line items, fit into different categories. We have categories for widgets, accessories, and widget-related services. So we can use the features of our templates to organize the information that we present. And so the best way to show that is really to take a look at this level 3 quote. And if I open that, now we can see there's mapping in several areas here for the basic data like the addresses and names and so forth. But if I look at the way that this table's mapped, we'll start to see that there's a little bit more sophistication here. So the key thing that we're doing here is using some features called grouping and looping. And again, if you're not familiar with mappings in general for templates, then highly recommend that you take a look at some of the introductory template builder material or courses that we have. But grouping acts to loop through elements of data that are common and to keep them together. So if I create a grouping around some data elements, it'll keep all of the ones that share the parameter that I'm grouping on together. So it'll keep them as one iteration. And then within that grouping, I can loop through the specific elements for that category. So you'll notice that my example here, I'm grouping by the hierarchy path, and the hierarchy path is just the way that the product categories are represented in CE. And then I'm looping across my quote detail, and the quote detail is the individual line items that would be underneath each of those categories. So this grouping and looping is what gives me that experience of seeing the product line items displayed according to the categories that they're in. And because I'm doing this grouping now, I want to take advantage of some other features. So you'll recall perhaps that my output had subtotals by category. So in my data, I'm not really storing totals by category. So I've implemented a feature within the template to keep track of the sum of the extended amounts for each product within a category. And this is by using a pseudo field. A pseudo field is a way for us to create calculated values on the fly. So I've created this one called the sum of the extended amount. And as you might expect, this is the sum of each of the line items. And if I look at its definition, which is what's important, you can see that the definition of this pseudo field is really just the sum of the extended amounts. So we're using some built-in function, or a built-in function called sum, which allows us to add the values across a field for each instance of that field. But there's one important parameter here that we want to turn on, and that's this idea of context aware. So the context aware basically means that when this sum is calculated, it will consider where it is or how it's being used in the document. So in this case, it's important because I want the sum to be by category and not across all categories. So I need to turn on context aware so that it knows when it uses this pseudo field to produce the sum, it's going to use the pseudo field within the context of the category that I'm looping through. And so that's an important parameter that needs to be set for this to behave correctly. Also in this output, you may have noticed that I have some bolding around discount amounts. Now, not all of them, but I do on some of them. Maybe I want to highlight, a really sweet deal on a particular product so that this line item, they're getting a big discount. And the rule that I've used here, so I'm implementing a feature called conditional formatting. And the rule that I'm using here is that if the discount is more than 10% of the total value of that product, then I'm going to apply some bolding italics to that particular discount amount. So if I quickly look in my mapping properties for that discount amount, I can see that there is a rule for when the discount is greater than 10%. Again, this is drafted using some of our built-in functions. So basically what this is telling me is that if the discount amount is greater than 10% of the line's extended amount, which is 10% of the total, then this rule will be satisfied. And I'll have some font properties set, which will say, make this bold and italics when it prints. And similarly here, we have a little comment that prints. If there's a discount, it's going to tell us what the discount is. So I'm going to use another pseudo field, which is the sum of the discounts, when I've calculated it in much the same way with a pseudo field. So you have a sum of discount pseudo field here, which is very similar to the sum of the extended amount, except obviously in this case we're going to add up the discount amounts. Now, if you're really observant, you might notice there's a bit of an error in this one. You'll notice that I have the little asterisk beside the total extended amount, and then it refers to this footnote, but I have it even in the cases where I don't have a discount amount, so I really shouldn't be referring to something that doesn't exist for those particular categories that don't have any products with a discount applied. So I should correct that, and the way that I would typically do that is I would want to put a condition around whatever it is that I'm variably wanting to show or not show. So in this case, I would probably put a condition around the sum of my discounts to say that if the sum of the discount for this particular category is greater than 0, that's when I want to show that asterisk. So the way we would create a condition is to simply highlight what we want to make conditional, choose the condition button in our toolbar here, and then we could say if it's a number and it's greater than 0, then we want this rule to be satisfied and we want the asterisk to print. And so we can simply apply that. And we can even do previewing from within our template builder here. So I'll just pick the same sample we're generating. If I preview this, we should hopefully see now that when we show this table of products, we don't show an asterisk for a category that doesn't have any discounts associated with it. So a few concepts here to really help us take the presentation of our information on our quote to a much more user-friendly look and feel, and showing it in a way that I think our customers would expect it to be shown for easy consumption. Okay, so let's move on to the next level. So you can see so far we've kind of looked at improving the branding and consistency of the look and feel of the document, and also restructured the data and making sure we're providing information in a useful and meaningful structure. But we may also want to look at making sure the data we're presenting is all relevant, or maybe filtering out information that we don't want to show. So if we look at the specific quote that I have, you'll notice we had 3 categories of product lines that we're showing. We have all our widgets, we have our accessories, and then we have our widget related services. So let's just say for the sake of argument in this case that we don't want to show the services. This is going to be a product only quote. So in that case, we want to be able to filter out information that doesn't apply to the particular output that we want to show. So first of all, I'm going to go into my data set. So in the SmartFlows world, everything that you have in terms of using mapped fields within your templates comes from a data set. Now there's a relatively new feature introduced that allows us to filter the data at the level of the data set, so we only would be returning information that's relevant for the specific needs that we have. We call this a filtered relationship. So it means that when we're picking the data that we want, we can filter it based on specific conditions that we set. And so within this data set, you'll notice here I have something called a quote details filtered relation. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to create a condition for this where I am going to say that the category or that hierarchy path for my document does not equal the widget related services. So it's only going to return me those product lines where the category is not that one of those widget related services products. So by enabling this filter and saving it, I can go back to this quote and regenerate it. And because I saved that live, I should be able to just generate the same one again and get a different result. We should now see that we get a slightly different product or quote summary of pricing and information of the products, because the category of products that related to those widget related services. So there's actually multiple ways you could have done this. We have the idea of result sets within our templates, which allow us to, again, create a filtered result. But there's a difference in that filtering out the data set means that that data will not make it to the template at all. So it's much more efficient in terms of data extraction, that we're not going to pull data that we're not going to use. Whereas a result set simply filters data that we have already passed to the template. And we're going to use one in just a second here, but the idea of using that filtered data set is actually quite beneficial in this case, where we don't need that data at all, and we can get rid of extraneous information simply by modifying the data set. So that's a nice way we can use a data set's definition and relationships to make sure we're only getting the data that we want. Now I want you to notice one other thing. So this, in my elevated quote, it has something that wasn't in the original quote, and that's these images of products. So it might be nice to add a little bit more detail around the specifications of our products and include an image so that the users can see maybe a little bit more what they're buying on these mysterious widget products. Now, there's lots of ways you could implement this. The way that I did is, again, if you recall, we have these product definitions. I've used attachments on these product entities to store a couple things. One is this little description, which you can see, and then the second is an image file, which we'll use to show on the quote. And notice there's a convention I've used here where the name of the file that I've stored with the image starts with the prefix of widget. So which, regardless of whatever one you look at, whether it's the small or the large or whatever, the name of the file always starts with widget. And I'm going to use that as a way to filter out only returning widget products for displaying the images. So I don't want to show the washers, for example, because they're not very interesting. And so if I look at my template and how we implement this, we have this area of product specifications. And since I want only to show the attachments where the file name contains widget, this is where I'm going to use a result set. So my result set very simply is going to say filter everything where the file name contains the term widget. And as long as I follow that convention in the way that I store the files, then it should work to only return those And when I implement this, you can see I basically created a loop around this table row where it's going to print the note text, which is the little product description text, and then the document body, which is actually the image file. Now, the key thing to understand here is that this is a different style of mapping than just something I'm implementing as text. And when we configure the document body, we've got to make sure we use the mapping property to convert it to image, and that will then tell the template that it needs to treat this as an image, and it will apply the proper rendering to do so. And there's some other properties you could set in here around sizing that image if necessary. Otherwise, it will just sort of inherit the native properties of that image. So it's by implementing this result set in conjunction with the convert to image on the mapping, when we can expect to be receiving an image file, that we're able to produce this nice list of, or table of, images that go along with our product specifications for anything that's on this quote. So let's move away from the actual template that produces the quote output and take a look at a more robust flow associated with these quotes. And so I've been generating this this level 2 quote, I guess I've called it, for the last couple of examples. Now I want to move to this level 5 quote. And this level 5 quote has a bit more functionality to it. So if I go ahead and I render it, you'll notice the first thing it's going to do is ask me for whether I want to send this specific quote for e-signature. I'm going to just bypass that and say no right now, and instead let the flow carry on. And you'll notice here that we get a little bit of expanded results from the previous example. Not only did we generate the PDF document, but we also have an additional step here where we're targeting a Power Automate flow as a subsequent step in this flow. So if I were to take you into this flow, so this was our level 1, let's go into our level 5. It's got a few more steps in here. Now, the basic starting blocks are pretty much the same, where we're retrieving the data, but this get user input step is a step that I introduced to ask that question about document signature or not, or sending for document signature. And so I gather that information, and then I generate the document, and then what I have here is a condition that will respond differently depending on whether the user had answered yes or no to that e-signature question. And so this condition, which is simply just checking for whether this e-signature question was true or false, and if it's true, we'll follow the true branch of this condition, and it will send the document for e-sign and then send it through this final step for, or this next step for calling this Power Automate flow. Now, what is this Power Automate flow doing? Well, I don't want to steal the thunder of a presenter who will be hosting a session a little bit later on integrating with Power Automate, but for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to show you that this basic Power Automate flow is essentially going to call or create a Teams channel if it doesn't already exist for the account that I'm interested in, and then it's going to send the document to SharePoint and provide a Teams channel message with a link to that. So if I were to look in my Teams environment, and I know that I'm generating quotes for this MyLilla account, you'll see here that a couple of minutes ago I got this message with a link to a quote, which I can then click on, and it will take me to this quote document that's been generated. So pretty slick that you can really open up a world of integration opportunities using Power Automate, or really any endpoint that you may have available. We can also take this through the second branch of this flow, where we will send for e-signature. So one of the very popular features that we find now people wanting is electronic approval or signature signing of documents that you generate. So let's say that this quote was something that a recipient would act on to confirm that they would like to move forward. I can request that this gets sent through the e-signing channel, and it will go ahead. So in the background, this has provided me with an email. So if I look at this email that was just sent, and you'll notice it's just this is a totally customizable email message, but this one is just sort of telling me that my widget quote is ready for my review and provides me the link to my DocuSign signing ceremony. And if I continue this process, you'll notice it's basically the same quote that we've seen with my products and such. Now there is the addition of a signing page. So this is what gets added when you select the routing to go through e-signature. So it's prompting the user to sign the document. I've also suppressed the transformational material that's really not necessary for the executable copy of this. So that's a rule within my composition to suppress that material if it's not necessary. And when I finish this up with my approval, and I look back at this flow, which is kind of in pause mode, I can refresh it and it will be aware of when the signing process is complete. And now we can see that we have actually 3 steps that were completed where the document was generated, it was sent for signature, and then my Power Automate flow to store it to SharePoint was executed. And you can see now 1 minute ago, or at this minute, I can take a look at the document that was just saved, and you'll notice that this time it has all my DocuSign signature information on it with my signature, and then you can see I just got the email telling me it was completed. And this is now an executed document from an e-sign perspective. And if I were to look in SharePoint, so this is the area behind my repository where these documents are stored, in the quotes section, you'll see here that a minute ago a document was saved, and we're grabbing the status of the signature ceremony which has happened. So once the person actioned the e-signature, the status becomes completed. So we manipulate the file name that gets stored in here so that we would know that this is a completed e-signed version of the quote that's been saved. So that concludes the functionality that I wanted to show you around taking your basic documents and document automation workflows from sort of boring and basic to something a little bit more sophisticated and robust, and using some of the features of SmartFlows to do so. I hope that perhaps you've gained something that you can put into practice or can envision how it may benefit the way you are using SmartFlows. Thanks for joining.